It's March 24th, 2025. It's Dwyer. Always 1776.com, a free site. Also money, 1776.com, a free site. Let's talk about the Kennedy assassination. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, Donald Trump, in an interview with Clay Travis, I'm a fan of Clay Travis's, excellent journalist, above and beyond sports. He interviewed the President of the United States and asked Donald Trump a question that should have been asked other presidents. Who did he think killed John F. Kennedy? And Donald Trump, who supposedly just released the remainder of the Kennedy documents, said that he thought Lee Harvey Oswald did the killing with the help of others. Right? This is the President of the United States. I'm assuming he has the highest security clearance in the country. This is not a new president. This is a president in his second term. Trump has already spent 4 years in the White House. I'm assuming the Kennedy issue has come up before, and just for no other reason than being a patriot who cares about his country and wants to know its history. One would imagine that Donald Trump would actually ask for the JFK file and find out who actually killed Kennedy. So his conclusion is that it's Oswald with others. In other words, Trump himself does not believe the findings of the Warren Commission. Now, we'll talk about why, in my opinion, the someone else was the United States government. In fact, I would argue it's more of a sure thing that Kennedy was killed by the government than by Lee Harvey Oswald. But first, what I want to do, because this has been covered up in history, what I want to do is to have you look in the comment section of this YouTube video. In 1997, acclaimed investigative journalist, and he's still with us, and he's still one of the best in my eyes, Cy Hirsch, wrote a book called The Dark Side of Camelot. Now, let me just say bluntly, it's one of the best books I have ever read. I was mesmerized by this book. Let me point out that ABC, the network, decided to do a film on some of the information that Hirsch uncovered. Right now, to me, it's this documentary. You may not have heard about it. It was criticized at the time. In an earlier video, I posted an interview done by Charlie Rose, who himself, if you look up his past, has some secrets. Right? Charlie Rose interviewed Cy Hirsch, and Rose, of course, goes out of his way to try to question Hirsch's assertion that Kennedy was not a Boy Scout. Right? In other words, there's the group out there that wants to defend Camelot. For the record, I myself consider Kennedy to be one of the best American presidents in our history. Right? But I'm someone who can handle flawed leadership. Right? Lord knows if you look at American history, you'll find that, one president actually died in the presence of his longtime mistress. Right? You have another president who was a full-blown alcoholic. That was covered up. Let's just say our history has presidents who have had problems in their personal lives. For me, being a child of the 1970s, that doesn't mean that the president can't be a great president. right? I want people to realize that the Civil Rights Act of 1963 that did not make it through Congress was authored by the Oval Office, right? Understand, John F. Kennedy is a paradigm shift on civil rights, right? He's culturally doing some things that were interesting, right? He has African-American heavyweight champion Floyd Patterson over to the White House. He has Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who many at the time considered to be a provocateur, over at the White House. He is meeting with Baynard Rustin, Dr. King. They're talking about the March on Washington in 1963. Kennedy didn't want them to do it. They decided to do it. In a moment of American greatness, Kennedy goes along with it. The President of the United States goes along with civil rights protesters at a time when you still had Jim Crow in the South, right? You had freedom riders traveling to the South to sit in at counters of establishments that would not serve African Americans. You still had poll taxes, grandfather clauses, preventing people from voting. The President of the United States decides he's going to side with the protesters, right? Kennedy is a president who had his great moments. But what I want people to understand is there's another side to Kennedy. He's a bootlegger's son. He not only has mob friends, according to testimony, records, he has a go-between between himself and Sam Giancana. Right? Dig a little deeper and you'll find out that that go-between says that it was Kennedy's idea. Dig a little deeper, look at White House phone logs, and you'll find out that that go-between, Judith Exner, with whom President Kennedy was having one of his several affairs. And let's be clear on Kennedy. He's not just getting around. He has full-blown mistresses. He has ongoing relationships with people. One of his mistresses ends up murdered after Kennedy's assassinated. Right? Her diary goes missing. Her brother-in-law, Ben Bradley, worked for the Washington Post. Right? In other words, a well-connected person in Washington society who had an ongoing affair with Jack Kennedy, ends up assassinated after Kennedy's assassinated. Well, what I want people to do is to look at what ABC News put together as part of the release of Cy Hirsch's book. As with Cy Hirsch's book, it's one of the best pieces of journalism that I've come across. And the reason I say that is because it was so outside the mainstream thought at the time that even with the people interviewed in the piece, right, including people who were involved in underlying events, some observers refused to believe the documentary. And what's shocking is one would think that this documentary would be widely viewed, would be front and center embedded in what happened to Kennedy. And understand it's been ignored. The link I have placed in the description of this video is to vimeo.com, But what I want people to realize is that not only is Cy Hurst an award-winning journalist, he's the guy who broke the My Lai massacre story from the Vietnam War. But just to understand, the video, the documentary that ABC did, had the following big-hitting people who lived through the Kennedy era and who, gave their opinions and who put facts in context. I'll just name some of them. Hugh Sidney of Time magazine. This video here is really intended for younger people because I believe my parents' generation couldn't envision a coup happening in the United States. And then they were lied to by the Warren Commission. I believe my generation, again, we were lied to. Some of the people telling us wrong information may not have intended to lie. Maybe they thought they were using, tech to show you that the bullets came from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. They overlooked too much evidence. Right? Younger people need to look up Hugh Sidney. Right? His last name spelled Sidey. When I was a kid, he was a big-time journalist. Understand, the networks, this was back before you had a lot of cable. The networks invest a lot of money in the reputations and credibility of their news anchors. ABC's news anchor at the time, Peter Jennings, is in this documentary. Now here's the coup of the documentary. They actually have on record, on film, several Secret Service members who provided the president with protection. Right? These are guys who loved Kennedy, the politician. But you could tell that the Secret Service was a little bit shocked by Kennedy the man. On camera, on this documentary, Secret Service members are talking about taking Kennedy to meet up with women. One actually uses the word prostitutes. Multiple Secret Service members talk about how this put Kennedy at risk. They themselves were wondering whether Kennedy was opening himself up to blackmail. Right? Understand, if you look through history, there are things they don't even put in the documentary. I'm not going to mention any of them. But let's just say, they talk about how Kennedy was meeting up with women they did not know who looked dangerous to them. Right, folks? This is multiple Secret Service members. You have, not Marilyn Monroe, she's no longer with us. On the show, you have Marilyn Monroe's publicist. In other words, this is an A+ level documentary. And he confirms what history has shown, what many people know. Marilyn Monroe had an ongoing affair with John F. Kennedy. Folks, it's ongoing. It predates her singing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President." Let me just say, if you look at the film and you want to see the real John F. Kennedy, the risk taker, look at him take the stage right after she finishes the song. Right? The President of the United States would have understood that this is being filmed. It's his birthday. We would be looking at the film decades later. He understood that a big star, Hollywood star, has just sang a provocative version of Happy Birthday, Mr. President, even though it's Kennedy's birthday. His wife, Jackie, the First Lady, is not with him. He then takes the stage knowing privately that the woman he's sleeping with has just sang to him on film that she's known. And he laughs it off. Why? Because Kennedy understood the bigger the lie, the more people who will believe it. Right? The idea of the President of the United States sleeping with Marilyn Monroe and her singing to him openly at a birthday event is just too far-fetched to be believed, even though it's true. Understand, too, you have James Bacon on the show, right? Many of these people are no longer with us. James Bacon, as many know, is one of the biggest, most influential, was one of the biggest, most influential reporters at the time in Hollywood. He's on the documentary. There's no doubt that the President of the United States was romantically involved with Marilyn Monroe, who, they talk about her emotional health issues. That's how they put it, right? We're talking about mental health issues. Marilyn Monroe is popping pills. She's drinking, right? As James Bacon himself tells you on the show, right? And she probably suffered from some underlying psychiatric condition. Could have been bipolar disorder. Understand, she wanted to go to Washington. She wanted an official role in the Kennedy administration. People had to understand that someone who is drinking a lot of alcohol, who has an underlying psychiatric condition, who's sleeping with a married man, might not fully grasp how any admission by her of being involved with the President of the United States could have undermined Kennedy's presidency. And of course, you actually have Judith Exner herself on the show. We don't have to speculate about what Judith Exner has to say. We can hear it from her. She's on the show. And she talks about how she would talk with Jack Kennedy from her mother's house because Kennedy told her her home phone wasn't safe. And how he would tell her about J. Edgar Hoover, talking to him about their relationship. Not Kennedy's relationship with Hoover, but Kennedy's relationship with Judith Exner. And she would talk about how Jack would say that she has nothing to worry about, even though she's taking messages from the President of the United States and delivering them to her other lover, the outfit Sam Giancana. And Kennedy would say, in phone call after phone call, that Sam works for us. The question you need to ask is, who is us? Is it the United States of America, or is it John F. Kennedy and his inner circle? Right? I believe there are many observers who looked at that Kennedy-Sam Giancana relationship who may have thought that Kennedy is placing the country at risk. Let me also point out, too, that on the show, obviously Hoover's no longer with us. At the time of the taping, Cartha DeLoach, the assistant director of the FBI, was with us. This is 97. He's on the show. Let me say, too, Frank Sinatra's no longer with us. Understand, at the time, 1997, Tina Sinatra was with us. She's on the show. The chief counsel of the House Assassinations Committee from the 1970s, G. Robert Blakey, he's on the show. Now, the show is even more important, in my opinion, than looking at the assassination and trying to dissect it. And we'll look at the assassination in a second here. This show is really on what was really going on in the Kennedy administration. As you watch the show, understanding that we're coming out of the Eisenhower administration. If there's an alpha from the time, it's Dwight D. Eisenhower. Right? Just understand we're coming from a, World War II commander, grandfather type president who was immensely popular. Now suddenly you have a guy who has several mistresses. Judith Exner is in love with John F. Kennedy. Right? You heard me talk about Ben Bradley's sister-in-law, who was in love with President Kennedy. Right? Kennedy has these women who he has ongoing relationships with. Ongoing. Kennedy also is fooling around with prostitutes. You hear that on the show from a Kennedy Secret Service agent. Right? You can imagine there are those from the outside who might have heard that Kennedy's relationship with Judith Exner actually predates his presidency. And they may have thought, you know what, we can't have this guy have a second term in the White House. Right, folks? I don't think that the people who hit Kennedy did so out of a lack of patriotism. I believe they thought they were patriots. They thought they were helping the country, which had no idea. Right? There's even information on this show about Kennedy's association with a Dr. Feelgood, who ends up having his medical license revoked. Just understand that according to the show, Bobby Kennedy had the vitamin shots that John F. Kennedy was taking analyzed and found that it contained amphetamines. Now, this is at a time, as you can imagine, of some of the coldest times of the Cold War. Right? The Cuban Missile Crisis happens on Kennedy's watch. Kennedy, of course, is the youngest elected president in American history. So you have a young guy who's having a lot of affairs. You have a young guy who is hanging with the mob. You have a young guy who's having affairs with people much younger than him. Right? He shows incredibly bad judgment. Kennedy apparently was even having an affair with his wife's secretary. There are two women at the White House. They call them Fiddle and Faddle. Right? Just understand, on the show, they're going to tell you that when Jackie was not at the White House, Kennedy would go skinny dipping with these women at the White House. In other words, everyone's a co-conspirator in what Kennedy's doing. U-City talks about how he had a conversation with Kennedy about Kennedy's favorite books. Kennedy names one. In the book, you have a landed gentry group that is, conducting world affairs, representing countries, heavy into public service during the week. And on the weekends, they're bed hopping. They're running the streets. Everyone's having an affair. You're going to hear from you on the show, an esteemed journalist from an earlier generation. He was A-list when I was a kid. You're going to hear from him that when he read the book, he started to understand the president more. So let's talk about Trump's crazy idea that Oswald had help in killing the President of the United States. Let's be clear on the official version, which isn't possible, we now know. The official version has Oswald in a car with his co-worker, Fraser, on their way to work. And Fraser looks and sees Oswald with a long paper wrap package. Right? Fraser says to him, "What's in the package?" Words to that effect. Right? I'm editing here, paraphrasing. And Oswald says curtain rods. Right? That's the claim. They get to work. Around 12:30, Oswald is up on the 6th floor. Somebody's there. I'll concede that. Right? Understand, Oswald can't stand up and aim out the window. The window doesn't allow that. He actually has to crouch. He has to crouch down to get the shots off. Now let me say this to lay people. The idea that someone could have a misaligned rifle and think that they can hit a moving car right through trees, crouch down at an angle, sounds believable. Right? You're thinking, oh, gee, a gun's a gun, right? A rifle's a rifle. The fact that this is a single bolt action, mail order, misaligned rifle makes little difference to the layperson. That's the story they're selling to the public. In actuality, Oswald's a military vet. Right? Oswald's been in the military. People in the military who have used guns, if you say to them, you know what, this gun is misaligned, you and I know they're not going to trust the weapon. Right? This would be like telling a basketball player, you know what, player, I know you've been shooting on a 10-foot rim. This rim's 10.5 feet. A Steph Curry might say, I'm not going to shoot on it because I don't want to mess up my stroke. Right? Shots that swish at 10 feet don't swish at 10.5 feet. Plus, you don't want to, change your mechanics so when you're back with a 10-foot court in a real game, your shots are off. We're supposed to believe that military veteran Lee Harvey Oswald thought that he could kill the President of the United States, crouch down with a misaligned rifle. Let me say this too. Nobody at the Texas School Book Depository sees Oswald with gloves. Right? Understand, Oswald leaves everything, if you believe it's him, in that sniper's nest on the 6th floor. Right? We're supposed to believe that the bullets are left on the floor. Right? Oswald's not the killer who shoots and then picks up the bullets. Right? Understand, the gun's not far away from the sniper's nest. That's on the 6th floor. Right? There are no gloves on the 6th floor. No one sees Oswald with gloves, but yet the rifle he supposedly shot doesn't have any of his fingerprints on it. Folks, it's his rifle, first of all. Even if it had fingerprints, that would be suspect. Right? Because it's like someone saying, hey, there are your fingerprints in your house. You would say, yeah, it's my house. I'm there. Right, folks? It's Oswald's rifle. But yet, his fingerprints are not on the rifle. Let me say this too. Where's the rifle as Oswald's looking through the scope, if you believe the story? Wouldn't it be up around his cheek? There's no gunpowder residue on Oswald's cheeks. There is on his hands. But he's supposed to have killed Officer Tippit later that day. So understand, the story doesn't add up. Right? Let's talk about some other stories. The president believes Oswald had help. Right, folks? The president's protecting people. Don't you think so? Because you have a group out there, excellent book, Lamar Waldron, I just disagree with him, where the argument is made that the mob killed Kennedy. Right? The idea is that Kennedy double crosses his friends. Who are his friends? It's the people who the Kennedys, Father Joe, promised would get some leniency from the ongoing, law enforcement investigation into them. Right? Sanji and Kana, the outfit, the mob, the people who may have helped Kennedy have dead people vote in the Illinois presidential election, right? The Illinois primary part of the presidential election, right? Understand, you have dead people voting all over Chicago. Nixon barely loses Illinois. Barely. Right? Nixon's people were going to challenge the election in 1960. Well, the theory goes that Bobby Kennedy, and this is bad judgment. I'm not saying I'm a fan of the mob. What I am saying is you can't betray your friends like this. Bobby Kennedy, of course, goes heavy after the mob. He's JFK's Attorney General. I believe, and I'm a Bobby Kennedy fan. But I believe Kennedy should have realized that he needed to play ball with the people who helped get him in office. Right? He needed to take the outfit aside and say, look, you know what? We're going to stop, following your people around. But you have to stop this part of what you're doing. Right? There should have been a frank conversation. There should have been some understanding. After all, Kennedy's hanging around socially with the organizer of his inauguration, Frank Sinatra. Right? Kennedy should have handled this differently. Now, the people who believe the mob killed Kennedy believe that the mob was upset. Understand, the mob is helping the CIA try to assassinate Castro. I know this is way over the heads of people from my parents' generation. But just understand, the mob had connections with different parts of government. Right? You need to view the mob like you would view a local government. So, let's just say the theory is that Kennedy betrayed the mob. Bobby Kennedy is going hard after the mob. The mob, fed up, believes that they need to, get rid of the head of everything that's happening, and they take out Kennedy. Now, it's a great theory. We can drop a lot of mob names here. It doesn't make sense. The reason it doesn't make sense is because the mob could not fake the autopsy. Folks, the Kennedy autopsy is a fake autopsy. You actually have third parties. Now, maybe at the time people overlooked mortuary workers, right? People who are helping take bullet fragments out of Kennedy's body. At the time, I'm sure they were viewed as little people. Folks, many of them have been interviewed. They talk about the amount of stuff they took out of Kennedy. It doesn't conform with the autopsy. Right? Let me say this too. Trump believes Oswald may have had help. May have had help. Doctors at Parkland Hospital noticed that the back of Kennedy's head's blown off. One doctor says that it's the size of a baseball, the hole in the back of Kennedy's head. Folks, that shot couldn't have come from the back. You understand, a shot that comes from the back would leave a small hole in the back of the head. The big part would be where the bullet exits. The hole in the back of Kennedy's head that's noted by Parkland Hospital isn't there in the autopsy. Right, folks? That would be the fatal shot. Right? Oswald's not the person who fires the fatal shot. Whoever put the big hole in the back of the president's head is the one who fired the fatal shot. That's a professional shooting from somewhere in front of the president. The fact that that's covered up in the autopsy tells you that it's not the mob. Let me say this too. The mob could not fabricate the chain of custody of the magic bullet. It just couldn't. The mob couldn't order the limousine in which Kennedy's assassinated. You would have thought that law enforcement would want that preserved. If you're going to figure out what happened to not just Kennedy, but the governor of Texas, John Connally, you would have thought they would preserve that limo. Right? Connally badly hurt. He's in the hospital. Right? It's a president and a governor who got shot that day. Right? The limo is washed within hours, folks. Forensics gone. Right, folks? The mob couldn't do that. Let me point out, too, the mob could not find a cadaver's brain to use in the autopsy. I believe that things took place. They had everything planned. But they did not anticipate that Abraham Zapruder would film the key moment of Kennedy's death. Right? You look at the Zapruder film, you see Kennedy's brain on that film. You see stuff popping out of Kennedy's head. You know the autopsy's comments on the brain are false. More importantly, the government had the brain in its possession, or so they claimed. And the brain was a normal-sized brain. How's that possible? As you look at the Zapruder film. Right? Well, just understand that part of the autopsy, and of course, the brain goes missing while in government custody. None of that could be done by the mob. The Harper fragment, the bone fragment that looks like it came from the back of someone's head. Understand, that would discredit the Warren Commission. It would show that someone shot from the front and blew off bone from the back of the president's head. Google the Harper fragment. Understand, the Harper fragment could not be taken away from the government by the mob. That doesn't make sense. Kennedy, too high profile, an assassination victim, to suddenly have his brain and other evidence go missing while in government custody. Understand, the mob could not get Kennedy's body out of the state of Texas before an autopsy was done on him. Let me say something important here, right? The Texas governor has just been shot as well. The law didn't allow them to take Kennedy's body out of the state of Texas. You would have thought a Texas judge could have stepped in and said, no, the law doesn't allow the body to leave the state of Texas. Kennedy's also our president. Besides, our governor was hit, and we have our own investigation to run. Right, folks? What I want you to do is to Google the circumstances under which Kennedy's body leaves the state of Texas. I want you to Google the comments of people who contend that the casket Kennedy's body leaves the state of Texas in is not the casket that arrives at the destination point. Right, folks? A lot is going on. Let me say this too. The mob couldn't fake the obviously fake story of Oswald trying to assassinate General Edwin Walker. Right, folks? Understand that Oswald did not have a driver's license. Understand there's a witness who actually sees the car leave the Walker assassination attempt location, Walker's house. Right? Nobody sees Lee Harvey Oswald on a bus with a rifle on his way to Edwin Walker's residence. Nobody. Nobody sees Lee Harvey Oswald at the Walker residence. Right? Nobody. Again, Oswald's gun is misaligned. This Walker story seems to have been scotch taped onto the Lee Harvey Oswald story when they understood that there were people who were doubting Oswald's involvement in the assassination of the President of the United States. Right? So, when Trump says Oswald may have been helped, I believe what Trump is actually saying is that I'm going to leave this open. You're going to have to figure out who the helpers of Oswald were. Right? My point to you on Oswald is that they asked Lee Harvey Oswald where he was at the time of the assassination, and Oswald put himself in the lunchroom where he was able to talk about who was in the lunchroom. He names two black guys who were both in the lunchroom at the time. Let me say this too. There are women who hear the shots and who immediately run to the stairway at the Texas School Book Depository. They never see Lee Harvey Oswald on the stairway. The official version, which we know is impossible because a Secret Service member has now written a book where he talks about finding the magic bullet on the back seat where Kennedy was sitting. Right? In other words, folks, take away the magic bullet component, the official version can't happen. Something shatters Connally's wrist. Connally himself thought there was more than one shooter. Well, understand, the women by the back staircase completely blow the official version out of the water. Because we're to believe that Lee Harvey Oswald shoots the president, immediately gets up, starts walking drops the rifle between some boxes, and is on the back staircase. Well, there were other people on the back staircase. They never see or hear Lee Harvey Oswald. I would argue that Lee Harvey Oswald's prayer men. Understand, we now have TV footage. Why we didn't in the 60s, I have no idea. But as you can imagine, media outlets were in Dallas to see the president drive through Dallas. Right? So they, of course, had cameras that flash the Texas School Book Depository. Now, there you have many of the people we know. Buell Fraser, who Oswald, goes to work with. Several of Oswald's co-workers, Billy Lovelady, who looks a lot like Oswald. You have them on film. Then you have a person there who we don't know. Right? The person, of course, is the approximate height of Lee Harvey Oswald. Right? But this is the 60s. This is analog film footage, right? It's not digital. They call that person Prayer Man. Right? The idea is that we don't know who the person is, but the way the person has their hands, it's given us the name. Well, they have gone through the building to try to match up who Prayer Man can be. Now, understand, certain people in the building are the wrong size. Certain people in the building are the wrong race. Right? So that allowed them to cut down the people in the building who this person could be standing on the side of Oswald's co-workers. As I make this video, they still don't know who the person is. The person could well be Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, importantly, they talk with some of his workers, including the guy who he went to work with, Buell Fraser, who admits that the package, the curtain rod package that Oswald had in the car, could not have been Oswald's rifle. Right? It's the wrong size. You can't disassemble the rifle and have it fit under Oswald's arm. Well, let me just say, Buell Fraser, of course, claims that he didn't see Oswald on the steps. Right? But understand, none of these people can remember seeing Prayer Man who's on film. In other words, it's one thing to come and ask me, hey, did you see Lee Harvey Oswald on the steps as the president's motorcade passed? It's one thing to ask me that question. It's another to ask me the question that never gets asked. Did you see someone standing right here, a few feet away from you, on the steps as the motorcade passed? Right? No one has been able to say, yes, I saw that person, and that person was not Lee Harvey Oswald. Understand, too, Marion Baker, moments after the assassination, a cop, member of law enforcement, he sees the birds fly off the roof of the Texas School Book Depository. He senses something happened. He runs into the Texas School Book Depository. Where does he find Lee Harvey Oswald? Not on the 6th floor. This is moments after the assassination. Oswald's not on the 6th floor. He's not on the 5th floor. He's not on the 4th floor. No, he's on the 2nd floor. The 2nd floor. Understand, Baker runs in with Oswald's boss. They actually stop and have a conversation with Lee Harvey Oswald. Right? Understand, Oswald, not out of breath, not animated, not sweating. Right? So there's only one group that could have helped Oswald pull this off if you believe Oswald's involved. If you believe moments before Baker sees Oswald on the second floor. That Oswald's actually 4 floors up. That Oswald has just killed the president, just ditched the rifle, has come down the 4 floors, has just entered the room with the Coke machine. If you believe that that happened, and the women, of course, don't see Oswald on the steps, if you believe that happened, and if you believe Oswald was able to convince this cop, and think about Baker's emotions, the president's in town. Someone has just shot as the motorcade is passing by. You're law enforcement, you run into the building. You understand. You might be looking for a would-be, at a minimum, presidential assassin. Imagine Baker's heightened sense. He sees Oswald, has no reason to think that Lee Harvey Oswald is that assassin. Right? No reason. So Oswald did have help, if you believe Oswald's involved. And folks, that help, in my opinion, is the intelligence community of the United States government in cahoots with others. I know there are those who want you to believe that conspiracies can't linger. Right, folks? There's been a conspiracy to keep records from you. How long has that lingered? Right? Understand, when you're dealing with military, when you're dealing with intelligence community, these are folks who are trained to keep secrets. You could have the setup be that something's going to happen. Right? Be vigilant. Where even the people involved in the operation don't fully know who's going to take the shot, who exactly is being shot, what exactly is going on. Right? I would argue that if there's a group in the United States who are uniquely trained to keep conspiracies, it would be this group. Let me also say, too, as Kennedy took the stage, after Marilyn Monroe sang "Happy Birthday, Mr. President," and as Kennedy himself knew, he was looking at his mistress, right? You'll notice as he takes the stage, he turns around and looks for her. Kennedy has a very high EQ, right? As Kennedy knew as he took the stage, the bigger the lie, the more the people will believe it. The idea of the President of the United States sleeping with, the top sex symbol of the country, while presenting himself publicly as Jackie's husband and as John Jr.'s father, is simply too preposterous for people to believe. Let's think it through. The CIA, which has been involved in multiple coups, which has been involved in assassinations, right? Kennedy himself is trying to get Fidel Castro assassinated, right? The intelligence community, which understands the concept of plausible deniability, right? Are we really questioning their ability to have a conspiracy and to keep a secret after all of these years? Right? J. Edgar Hoover knew that Kennedy was involved with Judith Exner. He never told you, did he? FBI never leaked that, did they? Right, folks? This is the secret-keeping business. These are the people in government who keep secrets. Right? I believe they have a whopper here. I think Trump was in a position where he had to say something that wasn't a lie. He understood he couldn't flatly say to Clay Travis, the intelligence community was involved in the killing of the president. So he comes up with plan B. Right? Oswald did it. We'll use the patsy. Oswald did it. With help. What does that mean? The mob? The intelligence community? The president, who's now in his 5th year as president, didn't elaborate. He knew he couldn't. He knows he still has secrets, having looked at files that haven't been released. Right? Understand, people have wanted the Kennedy files for years. What they've released is so tame that most pundits are saying, hey, there's not a lot here. Why wouldn't the government release this in the 70s or 80s? Right? Understand, I hear that it has some Social Security numbers in it. Well, redact those. I don't want anybody's Social Security numbers. Not only that, the people whose Social Security numbers are disclosed are minor players. Right? You want to hear about the autopsy. You want to hear about the shooting. Not some minor worker off in the background. Right? They've given you irrelevant documents. They haven't even admitted to all of Kennedy's affairs. Right? These are not all of the documents. So when asked by his friend, Clay Travis is a friend of the president. When asked by his friend, who do you think killed Kennedy? Donald Trump gave the high IQ, plausible deniability answer. I think Oswald had help. Right? Continue to use the patsy. Continue to use the patsy. Suggest that others were involved, knowing that future generations might find out that the others included our own government. Those are my thoughts. Please look at the video that's linked in the comment section of this video. It's much more important than this video, right? You can't understand the Kennedy assassination until you understand the reasons why a group of patriots in government would want to take out the president, would feel that the country is at risk because this bootlegger's son has an alliance with organized crime from the Oval Office. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.